Ridiculous.
Ridiculous, but I bet it was for a significant amount of money.
Still ridiculous.
Yeah, but fun. I'd watch it. Look, Jake Paul wants to test himself against actual, not just world champion, but one of the greatest of all time.
Really fought, and it wasn't fixed. Jake Paul would not survive 45 seconds.
I don't know about that. I think it would take a few rounds.
Really?
But yeah. First of all, Jake is a lot bigger. Jake's a lot bigger.
But what weight would they fight?
Well,
it's not about the number. If it was about the number, we could have started up. I would have tell you, I'm not just interested. It makes no sense for me. It's not my what I'm looking at right now.
Joe Rogan said he was shocked to learn that Jake Paul had offered Francis Ngannou a chance to be his next opponent after Paul's fight with Gervonta Davis fell through. On his podcast, Rogan described the proposed matchup as insane and nearly reckless for the YouTuber turned boxer. He emphasized that the former UFC star, now a feared force in boxing, is one of the most devastating punchers in combat sports. Rogan wondered if Jake truly understood the danger he'd be stepping into, but admitted that, if it ever happened, the fight would be a massive spectacle.
Nikista calls Francis. This is Francis telling the story. Nikista calls Francis and says, hey, we need your help. We need an opponent for Jake. Tank is out. And Francis says, all right. And Francis says, well, how can I help you? And Nikista says, well, we're looking at an opponent for Jake. Tank Davis is out. And Francis says, all right, but specifically, how can I help you? Nikista takes a third swing at the bat. He says, well, we need an opponent. We need a boxer. We need a partner. We need somebody to fight Jake. Tank is out. And Francis asks him again, okay, what?
When Jake Paul's exhibition bout with Gervonta Davis collapsed amid mounting legal allegations against Davis, Paul and his team rushed to find a new opponent. One of the names that surfaced was Francis Ngannou, the former UFC heavyweight champion turned crossover boxer, whose sheer size, knockout power, and global notoriety make him one of the most dangerous strikers in combat sports.
I think the fight is going to be completely canceled and rescheduled, and now we have potential opponent names and some people being ruled out coming into today. This is not a joke. It was said by Mike Coppinger and others that the #1 candidate to replace Tank Davis in a Jake Paul fight, probably on a different date, was going to be Francis Ngannou. What the f? But we have an update on that and other potential names that Jake could fight. Again, I think on a separate date, and why I think the Jake and Tank fight is completely off. No more, maybe, no more, we don't think it'll happen.
Michael Bisping highlighted the massive size disparity in the rumored matchup between Jake Paul and Francis Ngannou by noting that Paul's original target, Gervonta Davis, is a far smaller lightweight. According to Bisping, moving from Davis to Ngannou puts Paul on completely opposite ends of the physical spectrum. He emphasized that such a dramatic shift, from preparing for a smaller opponent to someone with Ngannou's size, reach, and knockout power, creates a mismatch not only in skill or experience, but in sheer mass and the legitimacy of the threat Paul would be facing.
Tyson, who's 58, Anderson Silva, who was way past his prime, people like Nate Diaz, who were way smaller. Gervonta Davis really did take the piss. I mean, that was just the craziest shout ever. To go from fighting Gervonta Davis, way smaller, to now boxing Francis Ngannou. I mean, listen, if he does it, fair play. But I just call #1 bullshit on this brother, because I don't see this happening. No.
This is #1 bullshit.
I just don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. Nate Diaz, yeah, 100%. I mean, he beat him once already. I'm sure Nate Diaz would love to get another big payday, because obviously boxing on Netflix and going up against Jake Paul, given his success, given the name that he has, and given the magnitude of his events, Nate Diaz will get paid an absolute fortune once again. We know that it wasn't too long ago Jake Paul was talking about boxing Anthony Joshua, and that never came to fruition. There's absolutely no way he would box Anthony Joshua. If he did, if he was to do something like that, whether it be Anthony Joshua or Francis Ngannou, I'd give him his props. I'd give him his credit. And you never know. Maybe he would do it just for the clout, because in many ways it would be, sorry about the airport notifications, it would be, you know, an admirable thing to do, and it would be Jake Paul taking on somebody bigger.
Francis Ngannou said he was surprised when Jake Paul's team reached out about replacing Gervonta Davis. According to Ngannou, the offer came abruptly and didn't align with his current career goals. Although money was mentioned, he declined, explaining that the terms and overall situation simply didn't make sense for him. He questioned how anyone could frame a switch from Davis to him as a logical matchup, stressing that his decision wasn't about chasing a payday. It was about whether the fight made professional sense.
Like Jake to replace Gervonta, I'm like, who's Jake? You know, like, I was so confused, you know, like, I wasn't expecting that at all. And he said, yeah, Jake Paul, you know, he's fighting. And I'm like, no, bro, come on. Don't disrespect me like that. And then they even say, like, they even come out after and say, and what if the number are good? He sent out some number. I'm like, it's not about the number. If it was about the number, we could have started talk. I would have tell you, I'm not just interested. It make no sense for me. It's not my what I.
Former UFC champion Daniel Cormier delivered a stark warning to Jake Paul about the potential fallout of stepping into the ring with Francis Ngannou. Cormier emphasized Ngannou's frightening knockout power and the overwhelming mismatch in both experience and physicality, suggesting that Paul is not prepared to handle a heavyweight striker with deep mixed martial arts pedigree. He framed the situation as one in which Paul could face serious consequences for taking on someone whose strengths far exceed those of his previous opponents. The message was unmistakable. This isn't about hype or a big payday. The risk simply outweighs the reward.
From fighting Gervonta Davis to calling out Francis Ngannou, Jake Paul don't want those problems. I can't say it any different. Jake Paul does not want any Francis Ngannou problems. He don't. He does not want those issues. While I think it's crazy and I credit him for doing that, and I'm surprised he did that, this could be a ploy. Him poking out his chest, saying, I want Francis. He don't want those Francis Ngannou problems. I don't care what Anthony Joshua did to Francis Ngannou. Jake Paul gets in there with Francis. Francis will knock his head off this planet. You don't want those Francis problems. I watched Francis put down Tyson Fury. Sure, Anthony Joshua beat him. But even if Jake got power, I don't think he got power to be dealing with Francis. Because all it takes is for one.
Cormier questioned Jake Paul's true motives, suggesting the call-out was driven more by publicity than a genuine competitive impulse. He argued that Jake misunderstands the realities of facing a heavyweight capable of punching straight through gloves. Ngannou's power is already legendary in MMA, Cormier noted. But in boxing, that force becomes even more concentrated and dangerous. He cautioned that if Jake steps into the ring with Francis without fully grasping the vast differences between MMA striking and boxing defense, the fight could end very quickly and not in Paul's favor.
Right? Boxing is much different than mixed martial arts. The target audience might be the same, but the demographics different. The places where people are brought up are different. There's bigger entourages in boxing. It's just a different world in boxing. We've known that from the very beginning. We know that Gervonta Davis was not going to just play to Jake Paul's rules. I still don't know exactly why this thing is falling apart, but it is falling apart bad. It is bursting at the seams. We are almost exactly where we should have never started. This should have never gotten started, but it did. But we are almost now exactly where we need to be in the fight, and that's...
Several analysts have flagged the idea of Jake Paul facing Francis Ngannou on extremely short notice as a risky decision, for Paul personally and for the broader narrative surrounding the fight. They note that Paul's original opponent, Gervonta Davis, withdrew late, prompting Paul's camp to reach out to Ngannou as a replacement. But as Ngannou himself pointed out, accepting a bout on such short notice makes little sense for his long-term career plans. From a strategic perspective, the timing also poses a major problem for Paul. Analysts argue that he wouldn't have nearly enough preparation to face a heavyweight with Ngannou's elite power, size, and experience. Many are even drawing parallels between the proposed Paul Ngannou matchup and Francis Ngannou's actual bout with Tyson Fury. The comparisons stem from similar elements: crossover appeal, an inherent stylistic mismatch, and an emphasis on spectacle over traditional boxing progression. Just as Fury stepped in against a former MMA champion and ended up struggling far more than expected, a Paul Ngannou fight would follow the same pattern. A social media fuel boxer taking on a massive, explosively powerful athlete. And in Fury's case, even as the reigning heavyweight champion, he admitted Ngannou pushed him harder than almost anyone he'd faced in the last decade.
Interesting about this is, okay, if they push it back to December, then that's slightly different. But this is the kind of one situation where you're kind of 10 days out, 2 weeks out from a fight, whenever they first got wind of this problem. This is the kind of situation where it would be possible that Jake Paul and Nikita Badarian and MVP, who are very, very shrewd people, this is the one occasion where they might end up making a mistake, taking someone at short notice who they shouldn't take. Because there'd be a whole raft of people putting their hand up for it, wouldn't they? Thinking, I'll take him at short notice. I'll make out that I've been sitting on a beach, eating and drinking for the last 6 months. But anything just to get in there with him. And then on the night, I'm gonna knock his head off. There'll be loads of people putting their hand up for this. And you'd have to be incredibly careful about who you took at short notice, because for it to have any kind of meaning, you would need to take a decent opponent at short notice, because obviously they're up against it because it's short notice. You couldn't take some barely warm body at short notice, because that would be even worse than giving them full notice. So this is the one area, the one situation in which it would be easy for them to make a mistake, but they don't make mistakes with things like this. They just don't. So yeah, I'm not surprised that they haven't been tempted into, somebody. Yeah, Ngannou, that'd be a mistake. It'd be such a mistake. I know he got flattened by Joshua, but so what? Joshua is a 2-time unified champion of the world, and Ngannou's 270 pounds of absolute granite. That would have been a terrible, terrible mistake if they'd given him the fight.
And he dropped, like, people. I know, my opinion, Tyson Fury won that fight with Ngannou, but he still put Tyson Fury.
He was close.
Chael Sonnen recently weighed in on the potential matchup between Jake Paul and Francis Ngannou with a blend of amusement and genuine intrigue. He pointed out that, from a pure sporting standpoint, the fight lacks the balance of a traditional contest, suggesting it would be more a test of how much punishment Paul can withstand than a competitive bout. Sonnen reminded fans that when Ngannou faced Tyson Fury, a seasoned heavyweight with true boxing pedigree and a significant size advantage over Paul, it took only one clean shot for Fury to hit the canvas. In Sonnen's view, if a heavyweight champion like Fury struggled with Ngannou's power, the idea that Paul could absorb those same punches without facing serious danger is highly unrealistic.
Says fighting Jake Paul wouldn't make sense. But what in the hell do you think Tyson Fury got for boxing you? These aren't mean things from me. This is a reality. Tyson Fury knew there was a check. Name one person you'd rather see Jake Paul fight than Francis Ngannou. Is a real challenge. How Tyron Woodley, Ben Askren, Anderson Silva, Mike Tyson. How those aren't real challenges, I don't know. But this is the story as we're told. And do you see where that would satisfy so much? Do you see where that would force even the biggest hater to be quiet? And my job for something to make sense is the biggest check against the easiest opponent. I cannot think of anything I would rather see
Jake Paul has built his brand on bold promotions and attention-grabbing matchups, but this time the idea doesn't seem to be landing. Unlike his earlier bouts, where opponents were closer to his weight and experience, this proposed fight feels lopsided and directionless. Many observers believe Paul's strategy of staying relevant through unconventional pairings may finally be wearing thin. There's a growing perception that the event exists more for publicity than genuine competition, which may explain why interest hasn't picked up despite weeks of advertising and media appearances.
Exhibition and he's retired. Tank still being in the competitive nature of the sport throws this one completely off for me. And the fact that Jake is like 60 pounds bigger than he is, right? Like, Mike was obviously far older than Jake, and that was the big knock on that fight. Mike should not have been in there with Jake. Said that many times. Jake has fought so hard against people saying he's bad for the sport. He's bad for the sport. He doesn't actually want to fight or step up or do any of this stuff. And I've kind of had his back when I'm like, no, he is doing what most boxers have done early in their career. But this gives those people more ammo to be like, yeah, bro, look, this is what we're talking about. When we say he's bad for the sport, or when we say that he's doing stuff that doesn't make sense and he's making a mockery of things, this is what they're talking about. And again, I wouldn't have any problem with it if Tank was way past the point where he could fight competitively at his weight class and have fights with guys like Shakur Stevens, or even, again, rematching guys like...
Chael Sonnen added that while Jake Paul's confidence and his eagerness to challenge fighters well beyond his level can be entertaining, stepping in against someone like Francis Ngannou is an entirely different matter. He stressed that Jake lacks the size, power, and durability that Tyson Fury possesses. And if a heavyweight champion like Fury could barely withstand a single clean punch from Ngannou, Sonnen argued, it's difficult to imagine Jake surviving even that.
Bludgeoning. You can't even grab a hold of the guy or try to squeeze him. You can only bludgeon and be bludgeoned back. I think you're got an uphill battle to question somebody. But they have been very effective in doing just that to Jake. Hey, you started with this NBA guy, and then even those MMA guys, they're not boxers. And then when you got around to the boxers, but they weren't current boxers. Then when you get around to the current boxers, they're not big enough boxers. And I just loved it. When I heard that Francis Ngannou might be going against Jake, I loved it. I mean, what's that going to look like? How many of those shots from Francis can you take? Tyson Fury, if you're talking clean, Tyson Fury only took one. Everything else, Tyson was able to roll with. Big Francis only had to hit him one time. Like, that's like...
Tim Bradley emphasized that the cancellation of the planned Davis versus Jake Paul fight had consequences far beyond just the two fighters. He pointed out that promoters, broadcasters, venues, sponsors, and marketing partners all faced financial losses when the bout fell through. The fight had been projected to generate substantial pay-per-view sales and sponsorship revenue, but legal issues surrounding Davis prompted networks to step back and brands to safeguard their reputations.
Get on Tank real quick. You gotta be the dumbest dude, in the history of boxing, bro. $40 million, dog, down the drain. You gotta be the dumbest dude I've ever seen in the history of boxing, bro. Seriously. I'm like, $40 million, bro. Wealth. Literally wealth, bro. Going down the drain. I don't understand it. I can't make the... I don't understand it. But I'll tell you this. MVP promotions, whatever the hell y'all call it, most valuable promotions, shit, more like rookie promotions. Yeah, more like rookie promotions. You didn't know what you were dealing with. You had no clue. This has always been down Tank's alley, man. Now, let me just say one thing.
Meanwhile, significant money had already been spent on production, promotion, and logistics, much of which is likely lost. Bradley used the situation to highlight the fragile economics of boxing. When one fighter's reputation falters, everyone involved in backing the event ends up paying the price. The potential showdown between Jake Paul and Francis Ngannou underscores a dramatic contrast in size and power, demanding a completely different approach from Paul. Ngannou, a heavyweight typically around 260 pounds, brings raw strength that rivals some of the hardest hitters in combat sports. In contrast, Paul has mostly faced much lighter opponents, relying on speed, movement, and spectacle rather than pure survival. For Paul to even begin competing against a force like Ngannou, his training camp would need a radical overhaul, building muscle, improving durability, and rethinking footwork, sparring strategies, and conditioning. What works against lighter opponents simply won't suffice when facing a heavyweight capable of hitting like a freight train. Many analysts argue that Paul cannot treat this fight like another influencer boxing spectacle, Months of serious, specialized preparation with top-level coaches would be essential for the matchup to have any realistic competitive sense.
It would be something unique. It would be something incredible. It's the same reason that I would be intrigued by a Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight, although I would never advise Jake Paul to take a Anthony Joshua fight. I wouldn't advise him to take a Francis Ngannou fight either, because as much as Anthony is far better, which we saw when they actually fought, Joshua slept Francis Ngannou quicker than me after 2 melatonin. I mean, it was quick, fast, in a hurry, completely dominant. But we also saw Francis Ngannou go toe-to-toe with the heavyweight champion of the world at that time. Yes, he was out of shape. We understand that. But Tyson Fury on that night got the shock of his life when Francis Ngannou not only went toe-to-toe, but put him down and danced on him. To this day, I think that fight could have gone Francis's way. Point being, there are levels to this shit. Not just in boxing, but in combat in general. And the size difference Francis would have over Jake would be incredible, but it would have been a great event. And a lot of people would have tuned in. Francis, though, is saying that's not happening.
How can they go from like Gervonta Davis to Francis Ngannou? Like, I mean, Gervonta Davis is a fantastic boxer, but and is a one-shot knockout artist. But come on, like the weight different and everything, it make no sense.
It's a good point. I mean, obviously, Francis is right about the weight difference, but it's a good point in general for what do you do next? Jake has sparred guys like Shakur Stevenson, Ray Ford, Montana Love to try to prepare for Tank Davis. And even if you book this fight on December 12th or December 19th, that's still a completely different fight than you were going into. Completely different matchup, size-wise, skill-wise, the things that you're going to need to even try to compete if it's someone like a Francis Ngannou.
Is this matchup a thrilling high-risk event or a mismatch that should never happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.
It will be something unique, something incredible. That's the same reason I'd be intrigued by Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight. That said, I would never advise Jake Paul to take on Anthony Joshua, and I wouldn't advise him to fight Francis Ngannou either. As much as Joshua is far superior, we saw in their fight that Joshua handled Francis quickly, efficiently, completely dominant. But we also saw Francis Ngannou go toe-to-toe with the heavyweight champion of the world at that time. Yes, he was out of shape, and we get that. Still, Tyson Fury got the shock of his life when Ngannou not only exchanged shots with him, but even managed to put him down. To this day, I think that fight could have swung Ngannou's way. The point is, there are levels, not just in boxing, but in combat sports overall. The size advantage Francis would have over Jake would be staggering. And yet, from an event perspective, it would have been incredible. People would have tuned in. Francis, however, has made it clear that fight isn't happening. How do you go from Gervonta Davis to Francis Ngannou? Davis is a fantastic boxer, a knockout artist, but the difference in size, skill, and power is enormous. Jake has been sparring with guys like Shakur Stevenson, Ray Ford, and Montana Love to prepare for Tank Davis. Even if the fight were booked for December 12th or 19th, facing Ngannou would be an entirely different challenge. Size, skill, strategy, all completely different. So, is this matchup a thrilling, high-risk spectacle, or a mismatch that should never happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.